Webster Nash by a mad painter, aka T.R. Becker. I sit here in my bed, an old man. My time in this world is soon to be over. I have contracted a disease that has no cure, but one that I carry proudly. Nothing can stop it because it causes cellular decay. My cells don't belong in this time. I know this is a bold statement, but it is the truth, and I believe that my story should be heard. Many of you know me as Webster Nash, the CEO of Slip Disc Technology, but the name that I was given by the old ones of my tribe is Wanderer, Wand for short. Yes, I said tribe. Where I'm from, there are not 10 billion people. We don't really know how many there are. My tribe is only around 1,000, and I know of only 3 other tribes. There are a few things in my world that you could take for granted. It was an everyday struggle to survive. Well, enough of this. Let me get on with my story. And by the way, I was only 17 at the time. The wind was light, and it was warm on my face. I was not in the sun, but soon would be, having to cross the canyon. It was a small stream, but it was no more than a few inches deep. But there were a few deeper pools. The water would be cool. It was melt off from the glaciers in the north. I could see no beasts along it and thought this was a little strange. I had never been this far south before when hunting, and I knew no one else in the tribe had. I was not hunting for food animals anyways, but was looking for red mushrooms that grew inside of caves along the cavern walls. They were sweet and in high demand for wine making. I fitted an arrow to my bow. I was not going to cross the canyon floor unarmed. I'm an excellent marksman, even if I do say so myself. I pulled my hat down to shade my eyes from the sun. It was still early and the warm air felt good. There was no clouds in the sky, but I was sure that there would be soon. I just hoped there'd be no rain. I had not brought my poncho. I did, however, have a jar of burn cream in my backpack. As I walked, I had not seen any sign of any kind of life. I had never been in a canyon where there was not a few lizards trying to keep from getting stepped on. When I reached the stream, I was surprised. The water was not clear. It had a yellow tint to it, and I didn't see any minnows. I began to have a strange feeling about being there. I had never been anywhere this lifeless before. I had decided to hike upstream and see if I could find out what was making the water yellow. I noticed that some clouds were moving in from the south. I hurried my pace. I didn't want to get burned by any rain. I kept a close look at the sky and the canyon wall for anywhere I could get to cover fast just in case. It had not always been like this. Many of the old-timers told stories about when the world was covered with trees and plants, when grass covered most of the ground and there was more kinds of animals than you could count. At that time, I thought they were just tales to tell kids. About an hour and a half later, I found where the yellow tint was coming from. There was a stream of the fluid flowing from somewhere near the cliff or from it. I looked south and the clouds were getting thicker and had the look of a big storm. I would have to find cover. I followed the yellow fluid. It went right into a small cave opening, which was great for me with the storm coming. I had to take my pack off and bend down to enter. Before I got too far in, I found my flashlight, just as the rain started. I was glad to be safe inside. The rain wouldn't kill somebody, but it would surely cause someone a lot of pain, making blisters wherever it sat on your skin for very long. I had been burned on my arm a couple of times. After about 100 yards, the tunnel opened up some and I was able to stand up and walk. I was careful not to step in the fluid as I'm not sure what it was. I did know that there was no life anywhere around it, so I was sure it was a poison. I came to a cavern. It was not that big, but I was able to find a place to sit down. It was only mid-afternoon, but I was tired. I could hear thunder once in a while, so it must have been storming hard. I unstrung my bow. There was no way I was able to use it in there. I still had my hunting knife. I wondered how far the cave went, and if I should give up on finding where the yellow fluid was coming from. I thought that if I could in some way stop it, then the stream would once again be clean. I hated the idea that it was a poison of some kind. There was far too little life in the world now. The old ones told tales of a far different world than what we have today. I didn't sit too long and decided to keep going. There was just one tunnel, so there was no way I could get lost. It began to go up slowly and curve. I felt uneasy, so I kept my hand on my knife. I still had not seen any sign of life. I still could not think of what the yellow fluid was. I'm not sure how long that I walked, but the tunnel opened on the plateau, or almost at the top. The rain had stopped. The storm had moved on. It opened into a small valley. There were a few very old buildings. The yellow fluid was coming from a small pond. There was an area that had washed away, and it was escaping slowly. I looked the pond over good and seen no problem in stopping the flow. There was a good 5 foot of lip around the pond's edge, but one spot had washed away and let it float out. It would be dark soon, and I had to work fast to stop it, but I was able to get it stopped. I would have to reinforce it the next day. I went back into the tunnel where it would be warm to spend the night. The night could get really cold on top of the plateau. The winds could at times blow a man off the edge. I found myself a nice spot to lie down and soon was asleep. I awoke one time by the sound of the wind made in the tunnel. My patch in the pond had held the night, so I went about adding more rocks and dirt to make sure it would be fine for some time. I looked at the old ruins that were not too far away and wondered who would want to live up here, and why would they have a pool of poison? I had no clue how old the place was. The buildings or ruins were old, that was for sure. I decided that since I was up there, to take a look at them. I had never heard of any tribe that lived this far south, yet this place was here. They had built with something that looked like rock, but I don't think it was. I now know what it was, but back then I had no clue what concrete was. I had restrung my bow before going anywhere near them. I still had an uneasy feeling about the place. The place was bigger than I thought. It ran under the ground as a small valley reached up to the plateau. I wanted to go up to have a look from the plateau before going underground. I had only been on top of the plateau just above my tribe's home, and then only the spot where the rock sheep were for a hunting party. I was surprised to find that only a few 100 yards away to the east was another canyon that was even deeper than the one I had lived my whole life. The wind was strong near the edge, but I had to look and seen that there was some kind of bridge spanning the canyon. It was over a mile long. I was amazed that someone could have done this. It had the look of new metal, like my knife or flashlight. It looked as if it may be coming from the ruins where it went back underground. No one in the tribe had ever mentioned that there was another canyon so close to theirs. I was sure if anybody had seen the bridge, it would have been the talk of the whole tribe. As far as I knew, my tribe was the most southern, and the other three I knew were of the north. Few had ever come as far south as this, but I really wanted to find a new supply of red mushrooms. I had a feeling it was going to be a long day. I could not see where the bridge ended. There was a foggy haze at that end. The canyon did not have a stream, but had to look as if at one time it did. I decided I needed to see if I could find how to reach the bridge. This was all beginning to get a little strange to me. I had just wanted to find mushrooms. I hung my bow over my shoulder, and with my knife in my hand and flashlight in the other, I entered the ruined building. I had to crawl a couple of times and make my way down a couple of floors. I finally found the door to the bridge. It was metal and showed no signs of rust of any kind. I almost didn't open it, for I had never seen one made of metal before. I took a look around the room first, but found nothing to tell me who the people had been. They had cleaned the place out. The door opened as if it had been hung the day before. I stepped out onto the bridge slowly, not sure if the thing could take my weight, but it seemed to be stable enough. At first the wind was not too hard, but by the time I got halfway, it was really hard. It was only wide enough for one to use, so I was able to hold on to both sides. The fog was still there, and I didn't like the idea of passing through it, but had little choice if I wanted to find out where it went. I looked down and thought, what would happen if the bridge gave way? There was no way I would survive. As it reached the fog, I was not sure if I could breathe any of it. It smelled a little funny, but it was all right. I took my time crossing. When I reached the other side, there was a door the same as the other. This one was a little harder to open, and when it did, there was a hissing sound. When I stepped inside, the lights came on. The walls gleamed with facets of light. They were cut from some kind of crystal. I had no idea if it was made or if the room was natural, but it was rather pretty. As I walked through, I noticed there was wires running here and there between the crystals. This made me wonder what it was about, but I had no clue. When I reached the other side of the room, I went through the door. I stopped dead. At this time, I really had no idea how to describe what I seen. There was lights of all colors flashing on and off with clicking sounds. I had never seen anything like it before. It was almost as pretty as the crystal room. The room was full of all kinds of rows of boxes and counters and a lot of bottles and jars of different types of fluid. It was some kind of workshop, I thought. Whoever the people were who made this place, they sure knew more than anyone who lived today, I thought. I rounded a bank of boxes and almost dropped my knife. There stood before me was a man made of bright gold metal. It was just standing there watching me, with eyes that kind of glowed, head cocked to the side just a little. I thought of running back the way I had come, but made no move. Looking back at now, I believe he, yes, I call him he, was just as shocked as I. It looked at the knife in my hand and then back at my face. "I assure you, sir, you won't need the knife," he said. It could talk, but it did not have a mouth that I could see. I really didn't think the knife would have done me any good anyways. "Did you come across the bridge?" I was able to nod my head in answer. This was wilder than any story that the old-timers had told, and to say the least, I was nervous. "I am called Placer." He held both arms out and added, "This is the Matrix hub," he said as if I should know what he meant. I'm not sure how long I stood there staring at him. I had no clue what a Matrix hub was, or why he would think that I would. "What are you?" I finally asked. "I'm the state-of-the-art cyber consciousness, a one-of-a-kind manufactured man. You really don't know what I'm talking about, do you?" "No, I don't. Are you real, or did that fog drug me in some way?" I was not sure. "I'm as real as you are. Please have a seat." He pointed at a nearby chair. So I sat down, but still held my knife. "You have nothing to fear from me. I'm designed to serve any humans in any way that I can. I am unable to harm anyone. It goes against my program." "What is your name?" he asked. "I'm called Wanderer by my tribe, but most just call me Juan." "What are you doing here? There are no people here to serve. Why are you still here?" A metal servant with no master, he thought. My duty is to the Matrix hub. I cannot leave as long as Ada Strong is lost in the Matrix. Well, she's not really lost. I know where she is, but for some reason have lost my lock on her. You are the first person that has come here in almost 4,000 years. Wow, I thought. He has been here by himself for all that time? I have no clue what the Matrix hub thing was, and someone could get, or how someone could get lost in time. You must understand that in my world there is nothing like schools, so any knowledge was learned by watching or doing. Most of what was taught had to do with survival. My world was unforgiving to the unaware, and there are 1,000 ways to die each day. Who is Ada Strong, and what's this Matrix you keep talking about? I asked. Ada Strong was, or is, the last time agent. I have no clue as what happened to her, and there is no one left here to send after her. I, being of metal, cannot go after her, and my programming demands that I stay here. The metric is how time travel is possible. So you can't go after her. Is that what you're saying? Only organics can be sent. As I said, my program says I must stay here if there is someone traveling. Right after she went was when the war started. The rest of the personnel were called away or were killed in the bombing. You have seen the ruins. For the next couple of hours he told me of what had happened to bring the world to where it was. I was not sure that I believed all that he said, but it did sound as if he believed what he was saying. All this had made me tired. Placer must have been able to tell by the way I looked and said, "There's a bed in the next room where you can rest. I'll prepare you a meal and let you know when it is ready." He pointed at the door. I'm not really sure how long I was asleep, but Placer had done a great job on the food, and we continued our talk. The world that I know is just a byproduct, an end result of eons of greed and war. I find it hard to believe that anyone could do some of the things he said. The human history that he showed me made me ashamed. Over the next couple of weeks, Placer had taught me what the Matrix Hub was and what they have been trying to do there. There was some other organization out there who thought it was their destiny to bring about the end of the world. The organization was named Forever Never, and they were able to use a time matrix too. They have been at war for over 1,000 years, and it looked as if they had won most of the battles. Ada Strong was sent back to the year 1978 to stop a Never agent from giving a young scientist a chemical formula that they told him would cure cancer. It seemed to work on cancer at first, but the second generation became contagious and spread it. None had a clue for over 2 decades since the government held the truth from the public. Ada had failed, and Placer had no clue of what happened to her. Each agent carried a coin that they tracked, but hers stopped working within an hour of her arrival there. With no one at the hub anymore, there was no one to help her or to fight the war. Since it's getting late for this old man, I'm going to shorten my story and jump ahead. Placer convinced me to help. I tried to tell him that my parents had to be worried about me by now. He assured me that if the war could be won, everything we know as history would change. Just how much I had no idea at the time. After all, I was young. Placer had given me clothes that were from that era. I was going to try to save Ada Strong. He led me to a small room that was full of a strange machinery with a 3-foot circle in the middle of the floor. He showed me a picture of her and gave it to me. I thought she was rather pretty and about the same age. He had given me 2 coins, one for her and one for me. I was to meet her as she arrived. Placer told me to stand in the circle. The machinery came to life. I felt a wind moving up my body, and then my sight blurred. I had to blink a few times. I was no longer in the hub. Placer had showed me what I'd find, but it was not the same as being there. I was standing in an alleyway. The sound from the cars passing were louder than I thought it would be. I walked to the end of the alley and watched the street. I was amazed by the sight. People riding in cars and people walking along the sidewalk with no care in the world, it seemed. I believed I would have liked to live in a world like that. Just down the street was a noise so loud that it made me jump. The cars all stopped and the people ran down the street. I rushed to look and discovered what had happened to Ada Strong. She was laying in the street, being struck by one of the cars before it had hit another one. Her purse was under the wheel of one of the cars. It must have been where the coin was. I ran up to her, yelling out her name, and people moved out of the way. I pushed a coin into her hand and pressed her hand tight, and did the same to mine, and a moment later we were back at the hub. My first time trip had lasted a whole 20 minutes. As I said earlier, I'm tired, and it's becoming hard for me to stay awake. Now you know how I first got into time travel, but you also know how I found the partner and the love of my life. After a nap, I'll continue. Now that I've had some rest, I should be able to continue. I really miss those days when I was just Juan and not Webster Nash. I'm not sure I'd be telling anyone this if I was not dying. The doctors all say I could pass at any time, so if I do as we talk, I apologize now. My first trip in time had lasted a whole 20 minutes, and I had saved Ada Strong, or I had brought her back to the Matrix hub. She had been hit by a car in 1978. Placer had looked her over and said she was fine and had only been knocked unconscious. A few days rest and she would be fine. Ada was rather pretty, shoulder-length brown hair and strange green eyes. I became fascinated with her. Placer allowed me to take meals to her, and I learned a lot about her. She had grown up at the complex. She had been trained to be a time traveler her whole life. She was only a year older than I, and the trip to 1978 was only her third. She felt bad that it had been a failure. Placer had told her not to worry about it, to just rest. I could tell she was not the kind of person to sit around and do nothing. I know that Placer said I could try again in a day or two, but I still feel bad about it, she said as she sipped her tea. I smiled. If Placer would let me, I want to help. She looked at me if she was trying to figure me out or if she could trust me. After all, to her, I was just an uneducated savage. She had thought a lot about it. It had been 4,000 years since she had been at the hub. Everyone that she had known was long dead, so I'm sure her mind must have been in some kind of shock. Placer, the cyber consciousness, a one-of-a-kind manufactured man, was the only one that she knew she could trust. I could tell she was not sure she could trust me, but I felt that she liked me, or maybe I was just hoping she did. Look, I'm not sure that I could help. After all, I did save you. I smiled at her. She looked me in the eye. It was the deep green eyes that had a hold on me, and it was then that I knew I was in love. You will have to do some training. I'm not going to be responsible for you getting yourself killed, she said. I'm not asking you to be responsible for me. What I'm asking is for you to give me a chance to help stop Forever Never and maybe change this world for the better. Forever Never organization, for lack of a better word, was evil. They wanted to bring about the end of mankind in any way they could. The more that Ava and Placer told me about them, the more I felt that I was needed. It took me a couple of days to convince them that I could be of benefit and not a liability. I agreed to start training. For the next 3 weeks, I learned that there were more ways to feel pain than I had thought. I got tripped, flipped, and thrown in every way there ever was, and a few I believe Placer made up. The two of them showed me how to use a gun and how much better a rifle was than a bow. It was the hardest 3 weeks of my life. but it was worth the pain and time. The best part about it was I got to spend time with Ada, who seemed happy to throw me around. I learned fast, much to the surprise of both Ada and Placer. I do believe that Juan is as ready as he'll ever be, Ms. Strong, Placer said as he watched for a reaction from Ada. Well, we can only hope he won't get us both killed, she smiled at me. Just talk about me as if I'm not here. Where can we try again and to stop forever and ever from passing this formula on? I was eager to start my first real mission as a time agent. I still have a few calculations to work out. We cannot have the two of you running across yourselves. We have no idea what that'd do to the timeline. Placer paused and added, you should be able to give it a go in a couple of days. For the next 2 days, all that Placer had me do was study about the 1970s. About that time, what really got to me was the television. Most of it made no sense to me. The music of that time was a little radical for the most part, and was not bad, I thought. Even Ada liked some of it. I asked Placer why I was trained in firearms, and he told me that we could never tell what we may face. I thought about just what my tribe could do with the knowledge of firearms. Not only my parents, but I was sure that the whole tribe had given up on me returning, and I had the feeling I would never be going back. I had a feeling that my future was with the Metrics Hub, and I would do anything to stop forever and ever, even if it cost me my life. Ada had told me about the days that led to the war and how the world had become divided between the rich and powerful and the poor everyday people. When the people had had enough, they rose up against the tyranny. They did have the numbers, but the powers that be had the technology and the weapons. Forever Never was in control of more than a few of the world's governments. Placer walked into the room where Ada and I were eating lunch. Good news, I have found a place that will be safe to send you, but you'll have to lay low for a few days. What does lay low mean? I asked. Ada smiled and said, we get to spend some time in Jacksonville, Florida. I had no clue what a Jacksonville, Florida was, but by the way Ada said it, she liked the idea. She explained that Jacksonville was a city, and in fact the city I had saved her from. The thought of spending a couple of days there was exciting to me. I would get to learn, or more so live, what life was like really in the past. As I said before, we could not risk you running into yourselves, so I found a spot near the zoo to send you, Placer informed them. Near the zoo, I thought? I had heard that there were many different types of animals, and this was a place where you could see them all. In my time, there were only a dozen or so animals and a few types of lizards. I was excited at a chance to see them. The next day, Placer had us set with clothes, money to pay for food, and a place to stay. He told us there was a place to stay called the USA Inn, not too far from the jump point. He handed the money to Ada, saying, there's plenty of money for anything you may need. You need to watch out for anybody that could be an agent of Forever Never. He turned to me and said, listen to Ada. She has been studying history her whole life. Both of you will find that type of life far different from what you know. Buy a couple of firearms as soon as you can. He paused and looked down. I hate to say this, but you may have to take a life. But remember, it's for the greater good. Wow, I thought, take a life. I had never given that a thought. I was not sure I could do that. Yes, fighting was one thing, killing was another. The only life I had ever taken was for food, and always would give thanks for that. I had always looked on life as sacred. It's time to go. I'll place you in Manilow Park. Ada, there's a map in your bag that shows where you are to stay. It'll be on a Monday, so you will have 3 days before the day you were hit. I thought I could hear a little concern in Placer's voice. Do you know who the Forever Never agent might be? I asked. Yes, his name is Jeff Dewey, but goes by the name Chicago Sharpie, Ada answered. Placer has gathered a lot of information on the agents we are up against. A few minutes later, we were standing in a 3-foot circle in the metrics room. If you are successful, you will save millions of lives, but it is only one battle. Go with God's speed, my friend, Placer said as he pushed the button. I felt the wind move up my body. I thought, what a strange thing for a manufactured man to say. My sight jiggled and the light made me blink a few times. I was amazed by where we were. I had seen trees, but were only 2 or 3 times as tall as a man. We were standing under many trees that were 40 and 50 foot tall. The ground was covered with grass that was still wet with dew. Ada must have seen my face, the wonder I was going through. In your time there are fewer trees? It is the same in my time, but they are 3 times as tall as in yours. Is there any grass? I looked down. Not like this. Most of my time looks just like outside of the complex, a desert. I really wanted to take off my shoes and run barefoot in the grass. We had grass, but not like this. It was not green, more yellow-brown. She walked over to me and slid her arm around mine. Come, we have a 2-mile walk to the motel. She pulled me along. It was rather warm out, but it was a pleasant walk. I stayed outside as Ada went in and got us a room. She came out smiling, holding up a key. Had to slip him an extra 20 because I looked so young. When we got to the room, I was surprised by how big it was. There was a desk and a chair, and a place for a couch and a matching chair. What really surprised me the most was there was only one bed. The first thing Ada did was turn on the TV and sit down, kicked off her shoes. She pointed at a door at the other end of the room. That's the bathroom, and it has what is called a shower, where the water comes down on you like rain. The thought of being rained on didn't sound too good to me. In my time, the rain burned you. I threw my pack on the bed next to hers and sat in a chair where I could see the TV. She had not turned on the sound. It was some kind of game show that made no sense to me. What's our next move? I asked. She looked at me smiling. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm going to give that shower a try before we go find something to eat. It didn't take me long to figure out how the remote worked, but really I was not paying much attention to it. I was thinking about Ada and how carefree she seemed away from the Matrix hub. It was hard for me to hide my feelings for her. After a few minutes, she came from the bathroom with her head wrapped in a towel and one around her body. She smiled and said to me, "Wow, that was great. It's your turn now." She took the towel off her head and began to brush out her hair. "Close your mouth and get going. Get ready. We need to get some dinner." An hour later, I was having my first ride in a car. I'll not lie, I was scared. I really thought we'd end up hitting some other car or end up dead in a ditch somewhere. Ada was amused by this. She picked out a restaurant with a name I could not read, but the food was great. I had no clue what a steak was, but it tasted fantastic with potatoes, which I loved. Just as we were about to finish, Ada reached over and touched my arm and nodded her head at the entrance. I turned to look, and standing there was Chicago Sharpie with a couple of other men waiting to be seated. He looked a little older than the pictures that Placer had showed them. "It's a stroke of luck we decided to eat here," I said. "Well, we'll see how lucky. Let's wait outside, see if we can follow him to where he's staying." I wondered if they were all forever never agents, but knew that didn't matter. We were only after one of them. Again, we lucked out. When they left the restaurant, they walked. As I learned, most time travelers never learn to drive, so most of the time they stayed nearby where their mission was to be carried out. As we followed them at a good distance, Ada wrapped her arm in mine and whispered, "We should act like a couple in love out for a walk." I must say it was no act on my part. I think she could tell it made me nervous, and I thought she was enjoying my discomfort. I really wanted to tell her how I felt. The walk was not too far to where they had rooms. Chicago Sharpie said goodnight to the others as he entered a room alone. I took notice of which one as Ada reached up and gave me a kiss on the cheek as she laughed at my look. The other three men paid us no attention as we moved past the parking lot. Even after we've had passed the place, she never let go of my arm. We came to a small diner and went in for a cup of coffee. I was delighted by how it tasted. So what do you think we should do now? I had no clue what she had in mind. She pointed out the window across the street. I looked. There was a building and a sign that said Steve's Pawn. It's still open and I have an idea. You sit here, I'll be right back. I felt funny sitting there by myself. I watched her cross the street, dodging a few cars, and disappeared inside as the young, smiling waitress returned to fill my cup. She looked at Ada's cup and asked if she had left. I told her no and please fill it hers also, and thanked her. After a few minutes, Ada returned carrying a brown paper bag with a smile on her face. As she sat down, she passed the bag to me. I almost dropped it when I looked inside. It was a gun. I looked at her questioning. You're not going to kill him, are you? She laughed. Not to worry, sweetie. I have a plan where no one will die. You may have to rough up Mr. Sharpie a little, but I think you're up to that. I handed the bag back to her. She had called me sweetie and thought I could handle myself with Sharpie. I was confused by the difference in her there than at the hub. I liked it, but was confused by it. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10 p.m. We know the name of the doctor that he is the contact. It's Dr. Albert Mooney. So what could that do us? You're going back and I want you to knock on the door. When he answers, tell him that Mooney sent you. When he opens up, leave the rest to me. That was all she would tell me of her plan. I will tell you, I didn't like it. I had to trust that whatever her plan was, that it would work. She threw a 20 on the table and said, let's go. When we got outside, she again took my arm as we walked back to Sharpie's room. Just before we got there, she stopped me, looking me in the eyes, smiled and gave me a kiss that I will never forget. I was unable to say anything. I just stood there staring at her. Okay, let's get this over with, she said. She led me to the door, removed the gun from her bag, and nodded her head. I knocked on the door and waited for him to answer. After a moment, she nodded her head again, so I'd knock again. This time there was a muffled and garbled, "What do you want?" from inside. Dr. Moody has sent me, sir. I hope he could not hear how nervous I was. I had never lied to anyone before. What? He said, as I heard him slide the chain back. Is something wrong? He asked as he opened the door. He was standing there in his boxers, half asleep. Ada pushed past me and put the gun right in his face, saying, "Get back and hands up." I shut the door behind me. "Sit down on the bed." I could not see any fear in his face. Ada said to me, "Dear, find something to tie him up with." I found a couple of hoodies in his drawer, so I took the laces out of them, and with one I first tied his hands behind his back. It didn't look too great, so I used the other. "I have to find something else for his legs," I said when I got his hands secured. "It doesn't matter," she said. "Yeah, she can kill me without my feet tied," Sharpie said in a cold voice. She had a smile on her face. "I won't kill you if you just sit still." She looked at me and said, "I want you to pull out your tracking coin and sit down next to him." I did as she asked, a little confused. She walked over to the other side of him, put the gun right against his temple and sat down and said, "Hook your arm through his," as she did the same on her side. "Now squeeze it." A moment later we were at the Metrics hub, and Placer, I was sure, was just as surprised as I was. We now had a prisoner of forever never and had stopped the formula from being delivered. Okay, I'm getting really tired now. I just hope that I have the time to tell you all of it. I must rest. You can come back tomorrow, and if I'm still alive, I'll tell you more.